I'm going to do a recording of orthographic drawing today. This is something that comes up in GCSE, Design and Technology, it comes up in BTEC Engineering, and it's one of those things, one of those skills that you probably ought to have in any sort of design, engineering, architecture practice anyway. So basically what we're going to do today is we're going to use something, I'm basing on a tape measure. I'm not going to actually draw this tape measure exactly, it's much too curvy for what I want to do, but I just wanted to get this in as a point of reference so you understand how the views work. The thing that students often get wrong when doing orthographic drawing is the fact that you're not doing three separate views, you are doing three views of the same object, which means that they have to line up properly. You can't have views at different points on the drawing and expect somebody to understand what they're looking at. So we use now third angle orthographic. There are other types of projection as well, such as first angle you might want to cover, but we're going to use third angle orthographic because that's what appears in most of our exam papers these days. So basically what that relies on is a particular rotation of your view. Now I always refer to it as a ski jump or a half pipe, where you're rotating your object through 90 degrees. So if this was my chosen face of my object, as I move it across in that direction, it goes up the half pipe, rotates 90 degrees, and we see this face here. Now this could be, in this case, a side elevation. So if we call that our front elevation, as I push it forward and rotate it up, that becomes our side elevation. Okay, if I return back to my original view, as I move it upwards, I'm going to get my plan view. What you lot sometimes refer to as the bird's eye view, it's actually the plan view, and that rotates 90 degrees above my front elevation. Now, depending on the object that you're drawing, or the component that you're drawing, you might also choose to do a view from below, and you might also choose to do another side elevation. And of course you've got the potential for other projections on there as well. Now I'm going to be doing this drawing today just using a ruler. Obviously if you were doing this in a classroom, you might want, I would expect you to use a set square to make sure that your angles are at 90 degrees and everything lines up properly. I'm also not going to use the method where some of you might be going, well, there's a projection method where you use 45 degree angle. I'm not going to be doing that today. I'm going to stick with what people have got available at home, and also if you're doing a sketch orthographic, quite often you might just lay your views out correctly and then come back and draw it properly later on. So I'm compromising a little bit here today. Now one of the things that we're going to begin with is thinking about how our views lay out. Now if you look at this object, as I say, I'm going to kind of make this up a little bit as I go along. If you look at our tape measure, it's going to have an overall size, in this case of 70, and an overall size of 70 that way. So we can actually think about a sort of a square shape at 70, and it's got an overall thickness of 30 millimeters, not including any clips and buttons and stuff. We're going to keep this quite simple because this is about rotating views. What I'm probably going to do today is to just bring that little bit of tape out by a little bit, just to help us to orientate ourselves a little bit. So if you think about it from that perspective, we're going to be doing a side, well, forget the clip, a side elevation, then we're going to rotate it to create a front elevation, a side elevation, and a plan view. Those are the three views that I'm going to do today. Now I would normally say as well to make sure that we draw a 1 centimetre border around the page. I think that's important because then you know you've got all of the information on the drawing by having a border. And of course sometimes there would be coordinates to let you know what part of the drawing. We're going to keep it quite simple today. So to get my views right, as I say, I'm not going to use set squares today. I'm going to do this reasonably minimum equipment to make sure it's possible. So I'm going to be really checking that my lines are parallel. I could use lots of measurement for that, but I'm going to just go with my eye a little bit today to keep it simple for you guys. So that's parallel there. I'm going to choose where my view comes in, and I'm going to start it at this point here. And whilst I've got my object, my first line sort of lined up, I'm actually going to draw a construction line really lightly across the page. Now I'm not sure whether you're going to see that. Yeah, you can see that. Okay, so I've given myself a starting point for my first view. I've drawn a line all the way across the page. Now I'm drawing it reasonably darkly so that you can see. I think you need to think about how light you can make it so that you can rub it out or it doesn't confuse your drawing. So let's assume that we've got our beginning of our object there. I said it was going to be 70 wide. Now what I'm going to do is, again, those are going to be my two views and they're going to line up. So I'm actually going to draw a line straight up the page here. Okay, now again, I'm looking for parallel here. Ideally you would do this with a set square, but I'm conscious that people might not have a set square at home. You should have one in a math set. If you were to go to your math set with your compass and everything, you should find a set square. That would be better. But I'm going to just work on the basis that we're going up here. That gives me a vertical line parallel with that edge. And because I know that that is 70 there, to make sure that this doesn't go horribly wrong, I'm going to now draw my next line at a line 70mm parallel. Okay, so I'm just checking those two. That's my vertical line. I'm going to just come down there. Okay, and that's 70 there. So if you look, that's going to be that view, then we're going to have a plan view above, and then we're going to come across here. So I'm going to do you remember I said that we were measuring approximately 70 by 70? So I'm going to do the same again over here now. Make a mark, choose my 70. I might as well do it on these. So again, if you had a set square, you'd be able to just line it up with the edge of your page and draw that line straight across, but we don't have that, so we're going to do it this way. Okay. So that's going to form part of my front view, and then we're going to have a plan view above. Now I'm going to keep this reasonably close. I'm going to choose where that view is going to come. If you want a measurement, I know sometimes people like a measurement to start with, I'm coming up. I'm going to come up from that view 30. No, I'm not. I'm going to come up from that view 25. And I'm going to come up from that view 25. And then from that, so that's going to be the starting point. That's going to be my front elevation. This is going to be my plan view. That's this side. So this side I'm now going to draw here. And we said that was going to be 25. 25. So as I said, I'm not going to be drawing exactly that tape measure that we've got. I don't think we need to be drawing all those circles when we haven't necessarily got all the drawing equipment. But we'll do a bit of rounding off. So that's going to give me my front elevation, my plan view, front elevation, side elevation. So over here, I'm going to choose a point. Let's see where that comes to. If you want to do it exactly my position, you can do. It doesn't really matter. So that's 6, and then 25. So what I've done there, I've measured where that view is going to come. There's my front elevation, there's my side elevation, front and side. So I've just, that gap doesn't really matter, I'm leaving room for dimensions, but this space here has to be 25mm between there and there. Okay, now again, because I chose 60, I can do the same on my top line. And then 25. Okay, so front elevation, side elevation, front elevation, side elevation. So all I'm going to do for a minute, and remember these are all construction lines, so these have to be nice and light. This ruler that I'm using has got a bit of a horrible edge on it. It's always worth trying to get your equipment cleaner, or clean and in good condition, because it makes a big difference to how your lines come out. And again, I'm drawing darker than I probably would like to, because I want to make sure that you can see our object. So what we said we were going to do was to have a little bit of a tongue sticking out from the tape measure. Now I'm going to make that up a little bit, because that actually, if you look at it, it's actually got an angle to it. I'm going to just keep that as a 90-degree shape. So we're going to bring it out from here and we're going to drop it down. So let's do some proper measuring here. We're going to come up by 5 mil on this object. And because I'm able to draw along my baseline now, I'm going to just measure up 5 mil as well here. And that allows me to do a construction line, just pushing out from my tape measure. Okay, so we're beginning to do that part of it. Okay, now I'm going to give it a nominal thickness of, let's call it, it's about 0.75 of a mil to 1 mil. Okay, and then I've got to choose a measurement for it because it has to appear on the view up here as well. So let's stick with some simple measurements. Let's go with 25 to the end of that little bit. So what we're doing is we're extending that out by 25 millimeters. And then we're going to choose to draw a line straight down to create the little hook. Now if you look at this, I'm being a little bit of a cheater here. I'm not using measurement for this because I think it will confuse us. This bit represents the tongue on the front of the tape. Okay, now I'll measure off that in a minute. It's 8, but when we come to drawing our drawing up here, we need to make sure that that and that correspond. In reality, look, it's not that thick, is it? And it's got a different angle to it, but for what we're doing today, I don't want to make things overcomplicated. So we've got the body of the tape here, we've got the front edge of the tape here, and we've got the top of the tape measure there. So now what I'm going to do is plot these across onto this drawing. Now again, if you were using your set square, you'd have it pointing out across your page, but we're going to do this just by using parallel lines. If you wanted to be really, really accurate, you could do all your measuring again, but I'm going to just plot it across. Now I don't know if you can see that line, I bet you can't. I don't want to go too dark at this point because otherwise it makes it really difficult. So I've just drawn 2 little lines here that plot across. And if you look at a tape measure, they don't actually come all the way across the tape. So we're going to be measuring in, let's call that 5 to 6 in from either side. Okay, so I'm going to do 5 from either side. So I'm measuring from this corner across 5, and I'm measuring from this corner back 5. And again, I could be measuring up the top or measuring onto here. In fact, I will measure onto those lines there. 5 and 5. I'm hoping that you can see this. So I've measured in from that corner and in 5, and I've measured on the line that's the projection here in 5. And I've done the same on the other side. And that's going to give us the front of our object. Now remember what I did is I've given it a little bit of additional height here to give it that thickness. Now I could really measure that. If I was doing a proper technical drawing, I'd be measuring that thickness and I'd be representing the 0.8 thick mild steel or chrome plated steel or whatever it is. So there's the top of our little tongue, that bit there, and I'm going to just do this as a rectangle here. And there. And what it should do is extend below our tape line. Now for now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just indicate it slightly lower than my main line, and I might come back to that. So we've now got this bit of tape extended out, we rotate it round, that becomes the front of it there. Okay. Now, what we'll do is we'll do a little square button on the front of this. We won't do all the diddly bits, but we'll do a square button on it, and we'll choose the middle of this object. So it's 25. So the middle of that is going to be 12.5. And then if we make our overall, yeah, so we're going to come, let's call the middle of it, well, let's not call it, it is 12.5, 12.5 millimeters. That's the center line. And what I'm going to do is draw my slot 10 mil thick. Okay, which means that I'm going to come on either side of that center line 5 mil. 5. I'm not worrying about how long it is at the moment, I'm just plotting the width of this groove that it runs in. Okay, and I'm going to just give myself a couple of little construction lines here that I can measure onto in a minute. Okay. See, my eye's telling me that this line is out. I've gone a little bit wide. And that actually is down to, I think my pencils are getting a little bit blunt, but we're going to carry on. Okay, so that slot does not go all the way down to the tongue. So I'm going to choose where it comes to, and I'm going to go up to 10 and 10. And draw a line all the way across. Okay, and then we'll make a decision. I'm not going to make this too long. I'm going to come up from there 40 and 40. So I've gone up 10 from my tongue. I'm then going to make my whole slot 40 and join that up. Okay, and then because I'm going to keep, I'm going to draw a little button on there as well, so I'm going to just keep that there for a minute. Okay, so let's make a choice about a button. We'll draw a button on now. I'm going to draw the button quite low. I'm going to come halfway down my slot, which is 40, and I'm going to do a button which is going to be 15. Now let's make the button 20. So it's going to be there and there. So I'm using my center line and I'm measuring above it and below it. Okay. And I'm going to extend this in a minute just beyond. Let's do it properly here on this side as well. That doesn't look right to me. Yeah, that one's gone a little bit long. So we'll make this extend just a little bit beyond the slot, because those buttons are a little bit bigger sometimes. Okay, and then if I come, I'm going to look at the 7. Now I don't mind if you estimate this a little bit, providing you get it about right. I'm coming 7 mil from that same centre line. I'm going to do the same over on the left and the right to give me my measurement. Okay, so my overall button width, if you think about it off a centre line, my overall button width is going to be 14 millimeters. There, and I'm going to just do it there as well. Okay, so we're going to just darken that button in a little bit. All right, now probably if you're someone who really likes their engineering drawing, you'll be horrified by my lack of precision here. But again, this is just drawing with the tools that we've got available at our homes. I hope you've all got a piece of paper. I hope you've all got a ruler of some sort. And you could do a much better job of this if you were using set squares, if your pencil was super sharp. but I think this is starting to look okay. So look, this button is going to actually stick out the front. It needs to appear on here. We need to decide on our profile here, and it runs in a slot. This tongue, let's call it the tongue, which is the actual tape, we don't see it in any depth here because it's facing straight forwards to us. And as I said, we might drop it in a minute when we're a bit further on with our drawing, just to give it that extra lit. But I'm just going to represent some of this stuff on our other views for a minute. Now, I'm going to use, put some radiuses on objects. Very rarely are things exactly at 90 degrees. They've usually got a little bit of a curve on them because of the simplicity of manufacturing. It also is often the result of using radius tools to make the original mold or press forming and stuff. So usually there is going to be some sort of radius. Now, this object, the one that I've used as my model, has got loads of radiuses. It's too complicated for what we're doing. So I'm going to just take a little corner off and round those over a touch. That radius would be, if I was using a circle template, if I was using a compass, that radius is probably 2 to 3 millimeters. Just round it over, and I'm going to do the same at the bottom of the tape here, and the same at the bottom of the tape there. And we'll keep this as a square tape to keep it simple. So I'm going to do the same here. Now I'm actually going to do a bigger one on the back because I think it will look nicer. And but for now I'm going to keep the front of the tape very, very square. The bottom of the tape I'm going to keep very, very square, but I'm going to do something on this back corner. Okay, and what I'm going to do, rather than saying get a compass and draw it exactly, you could either do it with a £1 coin, or I'm going to use a £2 coin and splash out. And what you want to do is to line it up so that the edge of the coin touches each side of your square. Hope you can see that. And then use that as our radius. Now again, if you've got a proper compass, or you've got a circle template or whatever, that would be a better way of doing it. Now, the dimensions of this are 17 mil. So when we're showing our diameter, that's 17 mil. Okay, so as a radius, you're going to have to half that. Okay, so if you think about halving 17 mil, it's going to be 8.5 as a radius. I'm going to just write that down there so I'm job done. 8.5 radius. And what I could do is show the centre of it. I'm not going to. Okay, now that I know where my curve starts and finishes, I'm going to just do my lines to darken them in. Okay, and then I'm going to just indicate it on this drawing above, just for reference for myself, where there's a change of plane, where it changes from being a flat piece to a curved piece. All right. So let's say that that's the front of the side of the tape measure drawn in, and we're going to just draw this button sticking out of the front, and we'll make it stick out by 5 mil. So I'm just measuring off the drawing for a minute, not really worrying about where it is. And I'm using those two dots to give me my construction line. And draw a nice light line there. Okay, so that line is not currently measured, it's just 5 millimeters off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my known information here to plot the top and the bottom of that sliding button. So there. And there. Okay, so that indicates that we're not seeing the slot in there. We could show it as hidden detail. I'm not going to do that. And I think looking at this button, I'm going to add a little bit of detail to it. Now again, we've got to be a little bit careful with our pencils. I'm going to just measure in 2 mil and up 2mm, and just chamfer that. Now that's going to give me a chamfer of 45 degrees. Now you do really need a nice sharp pencil for this. It will just make it more interesting to look at if I do that. Okay. And then to make this drawing look a little bit better, to show that these are actually separate parts, what I'm going to do is to just draw a line very, very close to this one. Just checking my pencil. Draw a line very close to the face edge. You'll see that in a second. And that indicates that those two are separate pieces. Now, if you are using sort of serious technical drawing pens, you might use a very fine 0.25 or a 0.10 to indicate that change of surface or the change of angle. Right, so if you look at our known information now, we've got the front, the side, the front, the plan. What we now need to do is to draw this detail that we've got here onto our drawing. Okay, we've got a lot of the information. We also need to draw this little sliding slot piece. I've got the information here that I can use to give me those measurements. Now, to keep this accurate, I'm going to measure off at 26. That's 26 because we made our original tongue 25 and then we've added that millimetre. So I'm going to just give myself a 26 measurement here, just one, because I'm going to use this part here. So even there I can just quality check that. That's not 26, that's 21. 26 is there. That's better. So now I can use this line here to draw the front. And this just a construction line. I'm not doing it really accurately. I'm not doing it measured, I'm just doing it off there. So that is this piece, that piece, and is that piece. So what we have to duplicate is the dimensions here over here. So we're going to need a centre line again. Now remember, this was 25mm wide, which means that our centre line is going to come at 12.5, 12.5mm. And I'm just going to plot that straight out. Okay, so there's a centre line drawn on there. I don't know again whether you can see that clearly on this, until I look at this on a screen. I don't know what you can see really, but there's my centre line. And then that measurement overall came in at 17. Okay, so to get to that 17 is 8.5 on either side of that line. So I'm counting 8.5 there and 8.5 there. I'm going to do the same over on the object, on the tape measure itself. 8.5 and 17 there. Okay, and now I can draw this out. Now you should be able to see it. Your pencil should be, your ruler rather, should be parallel with that line there. But this is just showing, let's call it the tongue. It's nothing to do with the tongue, but it's the actual tape bit of the. Okay, now I'm going to just darken that edge over a little bit for myself, for my own purposes. Okay, so this is the front. Again, we're looking down on this now, so I have to indicate where this comes out on the top. Okay, now the simplest way, if I had a set square, would be to line it up with the bottom of the page and then draw it all the way up. I'm just going to do it off here. We chose, that's, to me that's 18, from there to there is 18. So we'll do the same here. That's set at 18, which means that that drawing is going to be 18 there. And draw a line between those two dots. Okay, so we now have the top of that, side of that, and the front of that. So we've got quite a lot of information here now. So now we're going to draw the slots, which appears here. I've got quite a nice long construction line here. I'm going to use that to help me plot above, because I drew it in the first place. So my actual black slot is, not slot, the slider button is above. Okay, and then we chose a measurement of 15, I think, for this. Yeah, 15. So this is actually slightly narrower than the sticky out bit of the tape. The sticky out bit. So 15 is going to be 7.5. And from that one we're coming 7.5. Okay, and then I'm going to just plot that line. See what I've done? So that line there was straight up. That gave me the front of my button. The width of it is 7.5 from my centre line. That's my centre line. So I've gone 7.5 and 7.5. And I'm now just going to use my parallel eye to draw in where that button comes. Okay, and again just darken that in as a keeper. All right, and then remember we had that little fine separation line. I'm going to draw that in to show that that's a separate part. And then I'm going to just darken in my front face of my tape, but I'm putting that little round on it. The whole object's got this little round. So in between those two bits of the curve now, I'm going to darken that in. Okay, so we've now got a front elevation. Remember, we come up the half pipe, 90-degree turn. That's the front elevation, the side elevation. Front elevation, side elevation. Front elevation, plan. Okay, so we've got the curve there, but we don't show it. It would just look like a rectangle if we're looking down. We've got the slot. I'm not going to show this in hidden detail. What I am missing is my chamfer on that button, and I'm missing it over here as well. Okay, so wherever there's a change of plane, where it goes from one angle to another, we call that a change of plane. We've got to indicate that with a line. So each of these needs to have that line drawn on it. Now this one is going to appear, we came in 2 millimeters, so we'll do the same here. So we come down 2, and down 2, and we come up 2, come up 2, and now we draw in that line and that line, and then over here we're only doing it, we're looking at this angle here, we're only going to do it here on the top with one line, but it's still 2 millimeters down. Okay, so that's identifying for us that there is a change of plane. Now again, when you're using technical drawing pens or you're using CAD, you'd want to show that detail probably a little bit thinner than your falling away edges, your thicker edges, your outside edges. Okay, so we've got a chamfer, we've got a chamfer, we've got a chamfer. We've got a separation line where the two components are separate and one slides past the other. I'm going to bring this tape down a little bit, here and here. I wouldn't see any difference up here because I'm looking straight down on it. I can't see what's happening underneath, but here I can see what's happening underneath, and here I can see what's happening underneath. So we're going to come down to give it a little bit of an angle by a further, let's say, we're only going to come down a couple of millimeters. Do you know what, I'm going to come down 4. Come a little bit bigger than I was going to originally. We'll come down 4. And what I'm doing is I'm using my existing drawing here. I'm coming off this bit of the drawing. I'm going to darken that across. Okay, and then I'm going to just firm up that line so it all becomes part of one object. Alright, and then we'll do the same thing over here. So I came down 4. These are construction lines here. So down 4. Still a construction line at this point because I'm going to change the angle. I don't want that to be totally square. I want to give it a bit of a taper in. Okay, so we're going to come in from that corner 2 and in from that corner 2. And then join those dots up. So very often, I mean, if you look at an existing product anyway, you'll probably find there's an awful lot of symmetry on any object. It's easier for manufacturers, and unless there's a reason to make something different, very often we work off a centre line down the middle of an object, and it's the same on the right as it is on the left. It's just easier for setting machine tools up and manufacturing products if you've got that level of symmetry. The less curves and less organic shapes, sometimes it's easier depending on your manufacturing process. So these centre lines are super important, and once you start plotting in, you can really change the shape of an object quite easily. Now, I'm very tempted to draw the clip on the side, and if you would want to, that would be just a simple rectangle on the side would be quite a useful thing to do. I'm actually going to stop it with a simple rectangle on the side. I'm not going to draw this clip because I think we're getting a bit long probably on our drawing anyway. So I think I'm going to kind of call it a day on the actual drawing. What I am going to do is just to talk you through some very, very basic measurements, which will take another 5 minutes or so. Okay. I'm going to just round in my corners here, and again, if you've got proper drawing equipment, do it properly. I'm choosing a radius which is somewhere in the region of 3 mil probably, just to make my object look a bit more realistic. And I'm going to give you some very basic dimensioning. There's loads of dimensions we could include on this. I'm not going to include all of them. So let's talk about a centre line for a minute. I think a centre line is quite important. For me, one of the most obvious ones to put a centre line on is going to be my plan view, because that's where most of my symmetry is, or my side elevation, because that's where my symmetry is. I'm going to choose to do it on the plan view, and a centre line is dot and then quite a long dash. And what you want to do is try and keep your measurements of your lines quite similar. Okay, so your little dash is one length and your long dash is another length, and they stay consistent throughout your drawing. And you've got to kind of think of a technical drawing as something that is easy to read for somebody else. So I've got a small dot, small dash and a longer dash. That's a centre line. Now you can get a variety of centre line types, but that's the most common variety, really useful, and you can measure from it now. I'm literally only going to do some of the dimensions on this drawing because I don't want it to take forever. So I'm going to do a minimum of 3 dimensions on a drawing like this, which would be the overall width, the overall thickness and the overall height. There are of course many other dimensions. So a couple of golden rules here. My limit lines do not touch the drawing. they project off the drawing, usually following some of my original construction lines. I try and keep my limit lines the same length. If you were doing CAD, they would come out the same length usually. And then my dimension arrow that sits in between them also does not touch. So my limit line that I'm measuring from and to does not touch the drawing. My dimension line doesn't touch the drawing. Now, again, there's a few little conventions about arrowheads. I tend to do, to make them stand out a little bit, a little arrowhead like that. Very often people would do a single little line at the end, and that indicates the end of the measurement. And then I'm going to write above the dimension line 70. I'm not going to write millimeters because all of my drawings are in millimeters unless I say differently. I'm not touching my dimension line with my measurement. I'm not writing the unit, and I'm positioning it in normal reading axes. I'm not running it through it. Now again, Inventor seems to drop it down in the middle of the line. For me, my dimension number would always be above the line. I'm not quite sure why Inventor wants to do that by default. Anyway, right, now my £2 coin, remember, had a diameter of 17, which gave us a radius of 8.5. Now I'm going to just do you remember I marked off where my line came to? I'm going to just do a little mark where those two cross. And that allows me to do a dimension arrow. Now this is one of the few times that you tend to do a dimension arrow on the drawing, and even then you don't have to. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm showing there's the centre of that curve. I'm measuring to that line. I've probably come a little bit far away there actually. I'm going to come across to do my dimension up here. So my dimension arrow is here, continuing up and then across there. Now, sometimes those are at 45 degrees. I don't always do them at 45 because that can confuse the drawing, but they need to be directly related to that center point where the radius starts, okay? And then we're going to do R 8.5. Okay, so it's a radius of 8.5. Now, what other dimensions have we got to do? We have to have 3, don't we? So we've got our choice of where we're going to do them. I'm going to do my next 2 on this view here. Okay, I could have done it here, but that's beginning to get cluttered, particularly where I've got that radius. So I can show the same information here by doing my limit lines. Now again, I'm estimating them. They're approximately the same length. Not touching the drawing. And then my dimension line itself goes between my limit lines and does not touch the limit lines. Okay, now I know that that was 7. Okay, so this limit line tells us where the slot starts. This limit line to this limit line tells us how long the slot is. And then my actual dimension line is going to come here. Okay, and then my arrowheads, you'll notice that although I'm on the left hand side of the drawing, I'm still dimensioning at the same point, the same angle. So all of my dimensions in my drawing are going to be on the left hand side of my vertical dimension lines. If my dimension lines are running horizontally, they're always going to be above the dimension line. So I'm keeping my left to right reading style, if you like. Right, so look, I've deliberately left this here because I was worried that what I would end up showing I could easily fit my dimension in here, but I wanted to show you an alternative. If you imagine that this was much, much narrower, quite often what you would do is you would do a dimension line on the outside of your limit line to then indicate Did I stop mid-sentence then? Right, so there's my dimension line there, and rather than putting the dimension in between, although I could have fitted it in this case, to give yourself a little bit more room sometimes, you can do a dimension that points to a gap between two other limit lines and say that that's where the dimension lies. Sometimes you might put another little arrow on the inside of it if it was a very small slot. So again, I don't want to overcook this, I don't want to be overcomplicated. I think for me, I'm going to just do the width of this area here, and I might use that same dimensioning technique. I think I'll do it over here. Okay, so I'm going to take my limit line, again, not on the drawing, I'm using the drawing, but I'm just going to dimension above it. Okay, yeah, this is a prime candidate for what I was just talking about. And then I'm going to do my dimension lines. I didn't do one here because there was already an existing dimension line. This one needs an arrow on both sides. Okay, and then there's my small arrowheads. And that dimension was 7.5. Okay, so I've now dimensioned where that slot begins. What I'm going to do next is just to dimension the width of that slot, okay, with another limit line. Similar methods. Okay, so I've used that slot to give me where that limit line comes, and this time I'm going to come below. I don't like this. Anyway, I'm going to do it. I've started it now. So my dimensioning arrow now is going to cross another limit line. That's why I don't like it. I'd probably do a little bit more rearranging of that dimension at another point, or even try and see if I could dimension that slot up here without confusing it. But I think if you were spending a little moment reading it, you'd understand where it comes to. So the slot dimension is 10. Okay, now I could choose to do it there. I'm going to choose to do it here, just to try and keep my information clearer. Now, this is why your different line thicknesses would be really important, because someone would be able to tell if your dimension was in a 0.10 and your limit line was a 0.10, people would know, because your drawing at this point is probably going to be somewhere in the region of a 0.8, so it'd actually be a way thicker line. Right, I could go on forever. I love dimensioning drawings. I might just do a quick look. Here's a cheeky little arrow that shows that that is a R3 on that corner there. And then anyone looking at this drawing would probably assume, whether you should assume or not, it's a different story, but they would assume that all of my radiuses are 3mm. All right, now there's one final thing that I want to do with you, and that's the flower pot, which is the third angle symbol. Now again, if you had a CAD system where you had circle templates, this would be really easy to do. I'm going to do it much bigger than I normally would do. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to show a flower pot end on, and I'll make it really clear in a minute what we're doing. I'm going to have to draw around my existing coin. So I've got a £2 coin, and I'm going to line up my 5p coin in the middle of it. Again, if you have a compass, much better. This 5p coin is actually quite a lot bigger than I want it to be, but I'm trying to make it so that you can do this at home with minimum equipment. All right, now that, I'm going to do a line through it. Now, guess what? It's a centre line. That one's important, but this one is really important. I'm going to come across horizontally here. Right, as I say, this circle is way bigger than it should be, but I'm drawing around something for you. Basically, what I'm going to do is now draw lines. Now I've got my centre line, I'm going to just draw a little from, these would be called tangent, wouldn't they? So from that tangent, I'm just going to draw a line, making sure that I'm parallel with my centre line. Okay, and do the same thing off the outside one as well. Alright, now bearing in mind this is bigger than normal, what you then do is you choose the front face of that Okay, so remember what we're doing is we're showing an object rotating from there to there. So what this does, this indicates that end of the flower pot. The back one, it's like a cone. This back edge indicates the bottom of the flower pot. Now hopefully, certainly if you've had me as your teacher, you will have been shown this before. If you've got somebody else as your teacher, maybe that's something that they'll do with you or do it better, because I'm not happy with my drawing technique there particularly. This is me doing it so that you can do it at home. But that end there represents this end of the cone. That line there represents that end of the cone. So it's the object, and it shows us that this is a third angle projection. Remember, it's the half pipe. It goes up at 90 degrees as it moves along. There we go. Right, now there's lots of things wrong with my drawing. That it's not finished. I haven't got a border around my page. I haven't got a title block. I haven't got a date on there. But this was all about reminding you that we have at least two views, normally three views, where most of the detail is found. They all are at a particular reference to each other. They are not randomly placed across the page. But if you manage to complete that, it might take you a couple of goes at it. It might not be exactly the same as mine. When you're dimensioning it, use your measurements. If yours come out at 9 or 10, use 10. You know, don't be slavish about what you write down. It has to represent your drawing. It ought to be that you could give this drawing to somebody and they should be able to make your component or your product if it was an assembly drawing. All right, there's loads of, I could do hours and hours on this. I would certainly say for my even better if is definitely a border and definitely a title block, but we are 55 minutes in now and I think that's probably plenty for everyone. So good luck with that. I hope that works for you.